Sodomy and punishment is set at 20 years.
So I was scared. Whoever was inside my apartment was gonna kill me. And I'm sorry.
You're about to step inside real courtrooms where every gasp, every word, every verdict was captured in stark detail. Daniel Holtzclaw's collapse, Jayleen Fleer's silence, Leonard Gly's confession, Amber Guyger's embrace. Each moment unfolds not as fiction, but as the record of men and women once sworn to protect, now standing before the very justice they once upheld. These stories reveal more than guilt or innocence. They expose how power can bend, fracture, and sometimes redeem. What you're about to witness is the law judging itself, and the fall of one officer begins that reckoning.
He is guilty of the crime of forcible oral sodomy, and punishment is set at 20 years.
He stood motionless, eyes locked on the bench, as the final word of his freedom rang out: guilty. Daniel Holtzclaw, once a promising member of the Oklahoma City Police Department, now faced the dismantling of the life and authority his badge once represented. The silence that followed was not triumph or rage, but stunned recognition. A man once tasked with protection now embodied betrayal. The uniform is supposed to symbolize service, an unbroken line of trust between the state and its citizens. When that trust fails, the rupture is seismic. Holtzclaw's badge had once extended privilege, opened doors, and projected safety. Yet in that courtroom, evidence and testimony turned it into an emblem of manipulation. 12 jurors, ordinary citizens, were asked to determine whether his position as an officer had become a weapon of exploitation. Holtzclaw's police academy training emphasized ethical conduct and community protection. Yet gaps in ongoing sensitivity education left vulnerabilities to unchecked authority. From the outset, both sides fought over the meaning of microscopic evidence. DNA collected from inside Holtzclaw's patrol car became the central fault line. The defense claimed error, contamination, even deliberate planting, arguing that the evidence didn't prove direct sexual contact. But prosecutors countered with pattern and corroboration, woman after woman, none aware of the others, recounting encounters that unfolded with the same predatory rhythm. For them, the science only echoed what the survivors already knew. The crimes had a signature only one man could leave. Under Oklahoma statutes like Title 21, Sections 1111 and 1114, these acts violated rape and forcible sodomy laws by exploiting positional power. Still, the case was layered with controversy. After the verdicts, some witnesses later recanted, one even admitting publicly she had not been assaulted, and reports surfaced of a closed hearing allegedly held without defense counsel present. These revelations did not overturn the conviction, but added troubling shadows to an already complex proceeding, raising questions about credibility, process, and the limits of public trust in both policing and prosecution. The breach lay in leveraging his patrol car and badge for coerced sexual assaults, turning tools of enforcement into instruments of predation. Inside the packed courtroom, emotion overtook procedure. Gasps met each guilty count. Some victims wept softly. Others clutched one another in disbelief that the justice they had been denied for years was finally spoken aloud. Across the aisle, uniformed officers sat unmoving, their faces pale, their silence an acknowledgement of how far the fall had been. The prosecution's case transformed familiar tools of law enforcement into instruments of exposure. Crime scene photographers, forensic analysts, and evidence clerks, all colleagues from the same department, laid out the proofs that dismantled one of their own. The verdict marked not just legal accountability, but institutional reckoning. The law had turned inward. When the final count was read, Holtzclaw broke. His shoulders shook as he sobbed openly, the image of authority disintegrating in real time. The consequences included 263 years in prison, departmental termination, and eroded public faith in officer integrity. The sentence, 263 years in prison, sealed more than a fate. It underscored the cost of corruption beneath the badge. But the next betrayal would arrive from a different realm, where authority wore a smile on camera, while crimes unfolded in the shadows of a screen.
He tells multiple 12-year-old girls, "Do you have any younger friends who are interested in older men? I'll give you money to hook me up with them. The younger they are, the better.
Jayleen Fleer was 27 years old, an energetic deputy with the San Diego County Sheriff's Department, known for his discipline and charisma. He wore his uniform with the confidence of a young officer whose future seemed mapped toward promotion. Yet behind his badge existed a second life, an anonymous digital world where control came not from authority, but from access. On one screen, he was the model public servant, a husband, athlete, and youth coach. On another, under a hidden username, he crafted messages meant to deceive. Departmental protocols included youth interaction training, but insufficient digital ethics education failed to curb his boundary-crossing impulses. Investigators would later uncover thousands of disappearing social media messages, conversations that vanished within minutes, leaving behind only traces in server logs. They revealed a man who misused modern communication to contact individuals far younger than himself. In one instance, when a young person mentioned having a much younger friend, Fleer's response turned instantly suspect, unnervingly curious rather than dismissive. His position as deputy gave him credibility few questioned. He drove a county vehicle parents recognized, visited schools, volunteered at community events, and coached local teams. To many, he seemed protective, even admirable. That trust became his weapon. Using vanishing messages, he began with small praise, subtle compliments, and casual check-ins before crossing boundaries that no professional should. The conversations followed a deliberate rhythm, manipulation disguised as mentorship, control embedded in every word. California Penal Code sections 288.2 and 288.3 addressed inappropriate digital communications and unlawful contact, both central to his online actions. The investigation began with a tip to the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children. That alert drew in the Chula Vista Police Department's cybercrimes unit. They secured search warrants, traced usernames across devices, and matched geolocation data to Fleer's county-issued phone. Each discovery revealed deeper layers of deception. At one point, he was facing 44 felony counts, unlawful communication, boundary violations, and digital misconduct. Ultimately, the electronic evidence proved so overwhelming that Fleer pleaded guilty to 20 felony counts, including multiple serious infractions. The breach involved weaponizing his coaching role and deputy status to manipulate through disappearing apps, undermining safeguards meant for community protection. During sentencing, the air inside the courtroom felt heavy, not explosive. The judge called his conduct an abuse of authority in its most despicable form, condemning the betrayal of public trust. Those affected described how the trauma followed them beyond the messages. Some developed lasting anxiety, others could no longer walk past a uniform without trembling. Families admitted they had once welcomed Fleer into their homes, believing they were fostering safety. The defense sought leniency, citing personal turmoil and remorse. The prosecution countered with intent. Every choice deliberate, every message a step toward exploitation of trust. The decision was swift. 12 years and 8 months in prison, lifetime monitoring as an offender. Beyond incarceration and permanent record status, fallout included family dissolution and departmental reforms in digital oversight. Fleer's downfall illustrated how easily technology blurs the line between trust and danger. The digital trail he once thought untraceable became the evidence that destroyed him. And as another officer prepared to cross a different line altogether, justice was already waiting behind a hidden camera.
What's your name?
Paul.
Paul? Yeah.
No, my name's not Paul.
You just say Paul.
Leonard Gly had spent a lifetime teaching others how to confront danger. A former police officer and defensive tactics instructor, he trained recruits in control, physical, verbal, psychological. But when his own choices brought him into the frame of a phone camera on a quiet Pennsylvania street, control was the first thing he lost. His instructor's certification required annual ethics refreshers, yet lapses in personal accountability education undermined his professional facade. The man behind the lens was Musa Harris, a YouTuber known as LC Predator Catcher, who posed online as a 15-year-old boy to expose adults seeking illegal encounters. Gly thought he was meeting that teenager. Instead, he stepped into a confrontation streamed in real time, cornered by the same tactics he'd once taught others to use. Harris opened the exchange calmly, asking if Gly's name was Paul, the alias from the dating app conversation. Gly answered yes, then immediately denied it, a contradiction that unraveled whatever composure he had left. When pressed about the explicit messages, his tone hardened. He muttered that he wasn't with these homie games, a racially charged remark that only deepened the unease of the moment. The body once trained for restraint now radiated defensiveness. The teacher of tactics looked visibly lost. Viewers would later piece the story together through the footage itself. Gly, a man once trusted to protect, had been caught initiating contact with what he believed to be a minor. There was no ambiguity. The chat logs, the meeting location, and his own words stood as evidence. When police arrived, Gly no longer had the posture of an officer laying down the law, but of a suspect facing it. Technology didn't just record the crime, it exposed hypocrisy in real time. Pennsylvania Crimes Code 18, PACS Section 6318 and 901 addressed unlawful contact and attempt to corrupt minors, fitting his app-based enticements. Prosecutors charged him under Pennsylvania state statutes covering unlawful contact with a minor and criminal attempt, felonies that carry both incarceration and mandatory sex offender registration. Faced with overwhelming evidence and the viral reach of the video, Gly entered a guilty plea. The courtroom that followed was restrained, almost perfunctory. He received 1 to 2 years in state prison, 5 years of probation, and lifetime registration as a Tier 3 sex offender. The core breach was arranging an in-person meetup via deceptive profiles, subverting his training expertise into personal solicitation. No reporters clamored for comment. No lengthy trial unfolded before cameras. Just silence, paperwork, and a man who had once lectured others on discipline now listed among those he once pursued. For investigators, the case underscored a pattern becoming harder to ignore. Authority figures ensnared not by complex schemes, but by their own arrogance before the lens. Consequences extended to professional decertification, community ostracism, and mandatory therapy protocols. And as one courtroom closed on quiet disgrace, another would open to an even more complicated reckoning, one defined not by exposure or evidence, but by an unanticipated act of grace.
So I was scared. Whoever was inside my apartment was gonna kill me. And I'm sorry.
The sound that passed through an apartment wall that night would soon echo across the nation. A single gunshot fired by an off-duty Dallas police officer inside the wrong home. An action that erased a life and reshaped the conversation about accountability and bias. Amber Guyger told investigators she believed she was entering her own apartment. The door, she said, was ajar, the hallway dim, the layout familiar. Inside stood Botham Jean, a 26-year-old accountant eating ice cream on his couch. Within seconds, confusion turned fatal. Guyger's academy curriculum covered use of force de-escalation, but inadequate scenario-based judgment training amplified her fatal error. In court, the narrative of that night was dissected piece by piece. Defense built its case on mistake, a tragic misperception compounded by exhaustion after a long shift. The prosecution countered that argument, pointing to recklessness and an ingrained sense of authority that dulled her judgment. Under Texas Penal Code Section 19.02, the focus wasn't whether she fired the gun, but whether her claim of fear was reasonable. Texas Penal Code Section 19.02 defined murder as intentional or knowing causation of death, applied here despite claims of accident. The jury's deliberation became more than a legal exercise. It was a confrontation between empathy and accountability, fear and fairness. The courtroom took on a dual identity, one part trial, one part social reckoning. Guyger's uniform stood as both symbol and evidence, representing privilege and power intertwined with tragedy. Media outlets broadcast each proceeding, commentators parsing its implications for years of racial tension and policing culture. Spectators filled the gallery not only for justice in a single case, but for what it represented, how the justice system measures culpability when law enforcement stands on the other side of the equation. When the verdict came, guilty of murder, the room exhaled. It was a result few had predicted, and yet no one celebrated. Botham Jean's family sat only a few feet from the woman who had killed him, the air heavy with grief rather than triumph. Moments later came the gesture that would redefine the case in public memory. During victim impact statements, Jean's younger brother, Brant, asked to address Guyger directly. With permission, he rose, crossed the courtroom, and embraced her. The silence that followed seemed to hold the weight of two lives, one ended, one forever altered. The breach manifested in unauthorized entry and disproportionate force, bypassing protocols for threat assessment in ambiguous settings. Then the presiding judge stepped from the bench and handed Guyger a Bible. It was not a motion, not part of procedure, but a human impulse, a moment that blurred the boundaries of judgment and mercy. For some, it embodied grace amid devastation. For others, it demonstrated leniency the system too often reserves for those in uniform. Outside, protests questioned the 10-year sentence. Inside, grief, relief, and disbelief coexisted in fragile stillness. Outcomes encompassed a decade in prison, firing from the force, and nationwide reforms in officer wellness and bias training. This case closed not with outrage or spectacle, but with forgiveness complicated by justice. It left the nation staring at a question that reached beyond one verdict. What should accountability look like when those sworn to protect become the cause of harm? Justice is never pristine. Each case reveals how fragile that balance becomes when those bound by law violate it. Every verdict echoes beyond the defendant, reflecting a society forced to examine the standards it set for those who uphold order. Inside the courtroom, stripped of power and uniform, the truth stands unguarded. Each ruling tests not only the boundaries of justice, but the public's faith in it. The badge remains both symbol and scar, a reminder that authority, once misused, leaves marks that no sentence can fully erase. So what does justice look like to you? Share your thoughts below. Subscribe and follow Red Tape Red Flag on all platforms. And don't forget to like, share, and comment.